Everybody on our stretch of the mountain had an opinion about Daniel Tessay's cabin, and not one of those opinions was kind. It looked like a tin can somebody had stepped on and then changed their mind about. A squat wooden box with a great curved steel hood pulled down over it like a hat 2 sizes too big. Folks drove up the county road just to look at it. Some of them honked. One of them, and I'm not proud that it was me, sat on a fence for the better part of an afternoon making jokes I thought were a lot funnier than they were. I want to tell you up front that I was wrong about almost everything that winter. I was wrong about the cabin. I was wrong about the man. And I was wrong, most of all, about what it costs a person to build something the whole world has decided to laugh at, and to keep building it anyway while they laugh. This isn't a story about a clever house. Houses don't save anybody. People do, and people fail to, and sometimes the difference between the two comes down to a single decision made at 3 in the morning when you can't feel your hands and the wind is telling you to quit. I kept a log that winter. I still have it. The handwriting gets worse as the pages go on, and there's a stretch in February where it stops being weather notes and starts being something closer to a confession. What I'm about to tell you, I've never told straight through. Stay with me. The part where it stops being funny comes faster than you'd think. The snow came in sideways the night I almost died, and the last thing I expected was to be saved by the ugliest building in the county. Let me back up, because that's the kind of sentence that needs a running start. My name is Cal Renner. I've run cattle on the eastern slope of the White Mountains for 31 years, which is another way of saying I am tired in places most people don't have. I'm 63. My wife, Ruth, passed 4 winters before the one I'm telling you about, and since then I've kept a logbook the way some men keep a dog, not because it's useful exactly, but because the alternative is a quiet that gets into your chest. Every night I write down the weather, the count, what broke, what I fixed, sometimes a line or two that isn't any of those things. I tell myself it's for the ranch records. It isn't. Ruth used to talk to me while I did the books. The log is just me holding up my end of a conversation that ended. So that's the narrator for what he's worth. A man who talks to a notebook. You'll want to keep that in mind, because I'm going to tell you I'm a sensible person and the evidence is going to be mixed. Daniel Tessay bought the old Mercer parcel in late September, the year the aspens turned early. 80 acres of nothing much, rocky, north-facing, the kind of ground that grows lichen and resentment. The Mercers had let the place fall in on itself. I figured whoever bought it was either a fool or a man with a fool's money, and when I saw the truck go up the road, an old diesel, bed loaded with steel ribs and corrugated sheet, I figured I had my answer. He was White Mountain Apache. I learned that the way you learn things in a small county, which is to say sideways and with more commentary attached than fact. The talk at the feed store ran the predictable route. Wonder what he's doing up there. Wonder where he came from. Wonder. I didn't join in much, but I didn't stop it either, and there's a kind of cowardice in that I've had time to think about since. The first time we spoke, it was over a fence and a runaway heifer. She'd busted through a soft spot in my north line and gone wandering onto his ground, and I went up after her cussing the whole way. Found her standing in his yard, calm as Sunday, while Daniel stood maybe 10 feet off with his hand out, not touching her, just being still. He had a way of being still that I'd never seen in a man before. Most people, when they hold still, they're just waiting to move. He held still like it was a thing he was doing on purpose, like it cost him nothing. "She yours," he said, didn't look at me, looked at the cow. "Afraid so. She's been eating my squash. I'll fix the fence." "I know you will." And that was it. He turned and walked back toward the half-built monstrosity he was living in, and I led my heifer home, and I'd be lying if I said I didn't spend the walk back deciding I didn't much like him. I want to be honest about that, because it's important to what comes later. I didn't dislike Daniel Tessay for any reason that would survive daylight. I disliked him because he didn't need me. Out here, a man's worth is measured partly in how much his neighbors can do for him, and Daniel arrived on that mountain needing nothing from anybody, and that's a hard thing to forgive a stranger for. The cabin went up over October. I watched more of it than I'd admit. From my upper pasture you could see his place clean across the draw, and I found reasons to be in that pasture. He was building a Quonset, one of those half-pipe steel structures the army used to throw up by the thousands, ribs and arched sheeting, the whole thing shaped like a barrel cut lengthwise and laid on its side. But here's what made it ridiculous, what made the county laugh. He wasn't living in the Quonset. He'd built a regular little wood cabin first, small, tight, maybe 400 square feet, and then he raised the steel arch right over the top of it, like a shell over a turtle. A house inside a hangar. From a distance it looked like the wood cabin had been swallowed. People could not get over it. Why build a house and then build another house around it? Why heat all that dead air in between? Why spend the money? Why haul the steel up that miserable road? Why? T. Common Briggs, who runs the feed store and has never in his life had an unspoken thought, started calling it the Tin Armadillo, and it stuck. And within a month nobody on the mountain called it anything else. I called it that too. I'm sorry to say I called it worse. There was an afternoon in early November, bright, cold, that thin gold light you get up high before the real snow, when I rode my fence line and ended up parked on the rail near his drive, watching him bolt the last of the end wall panels into place. I had a thermos and nowhere to be. He was 40 feet up a ladder with the wind picking at him, and I sat there and I made jokes, out loud to nobody. Building yourself a fine submarine, I said. Hope the fish bite. That kind of thing. Small mean, the way men are when they're alone and don't have to mean it. He came down the ladder eventually and walked over, and I figured I'd been caught, and I felt the back of my neck go hot. But he didn't say anything about the jokes. He just looked at the rail next to me and said, "You want to know why?" It wasn't a question. I said, "Yeah, I supposed I did." He leaned on the fence. Up close he was older than I'd thought, late 50s. Gray coming in at the temples, hands like cracked saddle leather. There was a long scar that ran from his thumb up into his sleeve, old and white. "I built houses for 40 years, he said. All over, Phoenix mostly, stick frame, slab, the cheap stuff they throw up by the hundred. I watched every one of them I built start dying the day it was finished. Wind gets in the corners, water finds the seams. A house has 1,000 edges and the weather works every one of them." He nodded up at the steel arch, catching light like the back of a whale. "That's got no corners. Wind goes over it. Snow slides off it. The wood house inside stays dry, stays warm, and never feels the weather at all. Outer shell takes the beating. Inner shell stays a home." He paused. "My wife was sick a long time. I built it for her. Someplace nothing could get into." I didn't say anything for a second. Then, because I'm a coward and a fool, I said, "Where's she now?" "Phoenix," he said. "In the ground." He pushed off the fence. "Mind your heifer," he said, and walked back to his ladder, and I sat there with my thermos going, cold in my hands, feeling like the smallest man on the mountain. That night I wrote in the log, Nav 4, cold, clear, wind NW, fixed north line, hinge bolt on the gate. Daniel Tessay's wife is dead. I made jokes about her house. And then I sat there for a while and didn't write anything else because there wasn't anything else that wasn't worse. I didn't go up the pasture to watch after that. I'd like to say it was respect. It was mostly shame. But I noticed things, the way you do. I noticed the feed store talk softened a little, because Tom Briggs, for all his mouth, isn't cruel once he knows the shape of a thing, and the story got around the way the wife story does. I noticed Daniel started coming down for supplies on Thursdays, and that the men at the store, who'd had so much to say behind his back, said almost nothing to his face except weather and prices. I noticed he never explained the cabin to any of them the way he'd explained it to me, and I felt, God help me, a little proud of that, like I'd been handed something the others didn't get. December came hard and early. The first real snow dropped 18 inches in a night, and the mountain went quiet the way it does, all the sound packed away under white. I did my chores in a world gone soft and bright. My cattle bunched in the lee of the south ridge. My breath froze in my mustache. I was, I'll admit, a little happy, in the bleak way a man gets to be happy when his troubles are all the simple kind, cold troubles, snow troubles, the honest arithmetic of keeping animals alive. The almanac and the radio both said it would be a bad winter. They say that every year. This year, for once, they were telling the truth, and I had no idea, and Daniel Tesse, up in his ridiculous tin armadillo on the worst exposed parcel on the whole eastern slope, had built the only building for 40 miles that was ready for what was coming. I didn't know that yet either. What I knew was that I'd wronged a grieving man with a thermos of coffee and a mouth full of jokes, and that the snow was beautiful, and that I was tired in places I didn't have words for. I wrote Deck 9, heavy snow 18 in, Count Holding, quiet up here, quietest it's been since Ruth. Then I went to bed, and the mountain went on filling up with white, and somewhere across the draw a steel arch shed its snow load with a long soft hiss into the dark, exactly the way the man who built it had known it would. I'd find out about that hiss soon enough. I'd find out about all of it. But that's the next part, and it's the part where the laughing stopped for good. The storm that nearly killed me started as a line on a radio map and ended as the longest night of my life, and I have come to believe that the distance between those two things, a line on a map and a night you don't expect to survive, is the whole story of living up high. You hear the warning, you don't feel it, and then you feel it all at once. It was the 3rd week of January. The radio out of show low had been chewing on it for 2 days, a system dropping down off the Pacific, colliding with Arctic air sliding in from the north, the two of them set to ring each other out directly over our county. Snow measured in feet, not inches. Wind to 50. Temperatures that the announcer read off in a flat voice like he didn't believe them himself. I did what you do. Brought the cattle down to the home pasture, into the shelter of the windbreak and the old pole barn, topped off the generator fuel, filled every container I owned with water against the pipes freezing, brought wood in until my arms shook. I was 63 and I did the work of a younger man because there was nobody else to do it. And when I finally sat down that first evening with the wind already starting to lean on the house, I felt the particular satisfaction of a man who has prepared. I want you to hold on to that, because preparation is a kind of pride, and pride is what nearly finished me. See, I had a heifer down. The same fool heifer, as it happens, that had wandered onto Daniel's ground back in the fall. I'd kept her, half out of spite and half out of a fondness I wouldn't admit to. She was due to calve, early and wrong, and on the second night of the storm, with the wind screaming and the snow coming so thick the yard light was just a smear, I went out to the pole barn to check her and found her in trouble. The calf was turned. I won't dwell on it. Anybody who's worked livestock knows the next few hours, and anybody who hasn't doesn't need the picture. What matters is that I was out there far longer than I should have been, in weather far worse than I'd let myself believe, and that by the time the calf came, alive, slick, steaming in the cold, I had stopped being able to feel my feet, and the walk back to the house had become, without my noticing, a thing I was no longer sure I could do. That's how it gets you, not all at once. It negotiates. Just rest a minute. Just sit down out of the wind. Just close your eyes and let the work you did be enough. I got the calf nursing, I got the heifer settled, and then I stood up in that howling barn and the dark swam and I understood with a clarity that frightened me that I had made a mistake I might not get to correct. The yard light was gone, not off, gone, swallowed. The snow was a solid moving wall. I knew my own yard the way I know my own hands and I could not see 3 feet into it. I started toward where the house had to be and within 10 steps I didn't know which way I'd turned. The wind took the heat out of me like it was pulling thread from a spool. I want to tell you I was brave. I was not brave. I was a cold old man turning in a circle in the dark, calling out a name, Ruth's, as it happens, not anybody who could hear me, and starting to understand how these things end. And then there was a light that was the yard light, lower, warmer, moving. It was Daniel Tesse. He had a headlamp and a rope tied around his waist, the other end of it run back to something solid, and he had come down across the draw in the worst storm in 20 years on a guess. He told me later it wasn't a guess. He'd seen my barn light burning past the hour it should have, watched it from his arch where he sat up nights. He didn't sleep much, he said, hadn't since Phoenix, and he'd done the arithmetic that I, the prepared man, had failed to do. An old man. A barn light burning too long, a storm. He got an arm under me. He was strong in the way that surprised me every time, that contained way, nothing wasted. He half walked, half carried me, and I remember being ashamed even then, even half frozen, ashamed that this man I'd mocked from a fence rail was hauling me through the snow like a sack of feed. We didn't make my house. He told me later we couldn't have, it was downwind, and the drift had built against the door past 4 feet. He turned us instead toward the draw, toward the only thing he was sure he could find his way back to in the whiteout, the thing he'd strung his rope to. The tin armadillo. I don't remember the crossing. I remember the steel arch coming up out of the storm like the hull of a ship, and the sound, that's the thing I'll never forget, the sound of the wind changing as we came under the curve of it. Outside, the storm was a scream. And then we stepped through the end wall door into the space between the shells, the gap between the steel arch and the little wood cabin, and the scream became a hum. A deep, steady, almost gentle hum, the wind passing over 40 feet of curved steel and finding nowhere to bite. The snow that would have buried my door slid off that arch and piled in soft banks to either side, and the dead air between the shells, the dead air the whole county had laughed at, the wasted space, the why would you, held the cold off the inner cabin like a held breath. He'd built it for his wife, someplace nothing could get into, and on the worst night of the worst winter in 20 years, it let an old fool in. Inside the wood cabin it was warm. Not barn warm, not just out of the wind warm, warm, a small iron stove ticking, a kettle on it, the kind of warmth that has been steady for hours and means to stay that way. He sat me down and took my boots off himself because my hands wouldn't work, and he put my feet in water that felt scalding and wasn't, and he didn't say a word about the fence rail or the jokes or any of it. He talked, low and steady, the way you talk to a spooked animal. Told me about the calf, said it'd be fine, said the heifer would mother it. Told me the storm would blow 3 days. Told me I was an idiot but kindly, the way you'd tell a brother. And here's the part I've turned over more nights than I can count. Here's the morally heavy thing, the decision, though I didn't understand it as one until much later. There were others. I'd thought in my pride that I was the only fool on the mountain caught out. I wasn't. The storm had trapped the Delgado family, young couple, 2 kids, renting the old line shack 2 miles up the county road, a tar paper place with a wood stove and not nearly enough wood. Their truck wouldn't start. Their phone had no bars. And sometime in that first terrible night, before he ever saw my barn light, Daniel Tesse had gone up the county road on foot, roped to fence posts the whole way, and brought all 4 of them down to his arch. The kids were asleep in the loft of the wood cabin when he carried me in. The mother, Renata, was the one who'd put the kettle on. He had a 400-square-foot cabin. By the time the storm was done, he had 6 people in it, plus me, plus the firewood he'd cut for 1 man and 1 winter now feeding a stove that never went out. I did the math later, lying awake on his floor listening to the hum of the wind over the steel. He'd known, when he went up that road for the Delgados, that he was giving away his margin. A man alone in a tight, warm cabin can ride out anything. A man with 6 guests is rationing wood, rationing food, rationing the heat itself against a storm that might blow 4 days instead of 3. He'd done it anyway. He'd looked at his own survival, his careful arithmetic, the safe, quiet life he'd built inside 2 shells specifically so that nothing could get in, and he'd opened the door. I asked him on the second night when the kids were asleep and the Delgados were dozing and it was just the 2 of us by the stove, why he'd done it. Why take the risk? Why give it all away? He was quiet a long time. The wind hummed. Then he said, "I built this for 1 person. She didn't get to use it. He fed a stick into the stove. Seems wrong to keep all that warm for myself. I didn't have anything to say to that. I still don't, not really. I wrote it in my log later, word for word, because I was afraid I'd lose the exact shape of it. Seems wrong to keep all that warm for myself. And under it, in handwriting that's gone bad from the cold and from something else, I have spent 4 years keeping all my warm to myself. He has spent 4 months giving his away. The storm blew 3 days the way he said it would. On the morning of the 4th, the wind dropped between one breath and the next, and the silence after was so total it woke all of us at once. We stepped out from under the arch into a world remade drifts to the eaves, the sun coming up hard and white off a mountain scrubbed clean. My house, when we finally dug to it, was fine. The cattle were fine. The calf, the fool heifer's early calf, was up and nursing and would grow into the orneriest cow I ever owned. Everybody lived. That's the thing. Everybody lived who shouldn't have, and the only reason was a building the whole county had laughed at, and a man the whole county had decided not to know. But I'm getting ahead of the ending, and the ending isn't as clean as everybody living. It never is up here. There's a cost to these things that doesn't show up the morning the sun comes out. It shows up later, and it showed up for Daniel Tesse in a way I didn't see coming, and that's the last part, and it's the part I've been working up the nerve to tell since I started. You'd think the story ends with the sun coming up. Everybody safe, the ugly cabin proved right, the cruel jokers shamed, the grieving man vindicated. You'd think that, and you'd be wrong, and the wrongness of it is the only part of this I've never made peace with. Here's what actually happened. The county found out, the way it does. The Delgados weren't quiet people, thank God, and Renata told the story everywhere she could, at the school, at the church down in the valley, at the feed store where Tom and Briggs had named the thing the tin armadillo, and now had the decency to look at the floor while she talked. By spring, there wasn't a soul on the mountain who didn't know that Daniel Tesse had walked 2 miles up a county road in a 50-mile wind to carry 2 children out of a freezing shack, and had pulled Cal Renner out of his own yard besides, and had fed and warmed 7 people for 3 days on the supplies he'd laid in for 1. They wanted to thank him. That's the part that breaks my heart a little even now. They wanted so badly to make it right, the county that had laughed, the men at the store who'd had so much to say. They took up a collection. They organized. Somebody from the paper in Show Low drove up to do a story. Local man's strange cabin saves 7 in blizzard, with a photo of the arch shining in the snow that made it look, finally, not ridiculous but rather beautiful, the way a thing looks once you understand it. There was talk of a plaque, talk of the county commissioner, talk, all of it kind now, all of it too late and shaped wrong. Daniel hated it. I don't think hated is even the right word. I think it frightened him. This was a man who had built 2 shells around himself on the most remote parcel he could find, who had moved to a mountain where nobody knew him precisely so that nobody would, and now the whole county was beating a path to his door with casseroles and gratitude and a reporter's camera, and every bit of it was the exact thing he'd built his strange, beautiful cabin to keep out. They thought they were giving him something. They were taking the one thing he'd come up the mountain to find: quiet, the right to grieve where nothing could get in. He came to me about it. That's the part I hold on to. Of everybody on the mountain, he came to me, the man who'd mocked him from a fence rail, who he'd hauled half dead through a blizzard, who owed him a debt that couldn't be named let alone paid. He sat at my kitchen table in March with the snow going to mud outside, and he turned his coffee cup in those scarred hands and he said, "I don't know how to make them stop being kind to me." And I laughed because it was funny in the awful way the truest things are. "There's a sentence," I said. "Most men spend their lives wishing for that problem." "I know it," he almost smiled. "Doesn't help." We sat there a while. I thought about all the casseroles in my own freezer from 4 years back, the ones I couldn't eat because every one of them was a person telling me Ruth was really gone. I thought I understood something about him then that maybe nobody else on the mountain could. "They're not being kind to you," I said finally. "Not really. They're being kind to themselves. They feel bad, they laughed. You let them say thank you, they get to stop feeling bad. It's not about you at all. I turned my own cup. Took me a long time to figure out that grief and gratitude get handled the same way up here. People bring you food so they don't have to feel the thing. You can let them. Doesn't mean you have to feel it back. He looked at me for a long moment. That how you did it, with your wife? No, I said. I did it wrong. I shut the door. That's why I'm telling you to leave yours cracked. He left soon after that. Not the mountain, the noise. He took a job that summer with a relief outfit out of Phoenix, the kind that builds emergency shelters after floods and fires, hauls in those steel arches by the truckload, and throws up dry, warm space for people who have lost everything. It made a terrible kind of sense. A man who'd built one perfect shell to keep the world out, spending the rest of his days building them to take the world in. He'd send a postcard now and then. Built 9 of these in a week outside Yuma. They go up faster than you'd think. The corners are still the problem, there aren't any, and people don't trust a thing without corners until the wind comes. I've got a drawer of them. The cabin's still up on the Mercer parcel. He never sold it. Comes back some winters, I hear, though I've not seen him in 3 years now. The arch still sheds its snow with that long, soft hiss. The kids he carried out of the shack, the Delgado kids, they're teenagers now, and the younger one, the girl, she's the one who paints. There's a mural on the side of the school down in the valley, and if you look at it you'll see a mountain and a storm and a curved silver shape with light coming out from under it, and 7 small figures gathered in the warm. She never put a plaque on it, never put his name. He'd have hated that, she knew. I'm 71 now. I still keep the log. The handwriting's worse than ever and I've stopped pretending it's for the ranch. Last winter I read back through the pages from the year of the storm, the bad handwriting, the line about keeping all that warm to myself, and I sat at the table a long time. Here's what I've come to. I spent that whole autumn deciding I didn't like a man because he didn't need me. And the truth, the thing it took a blizzard and 7 years to teach me, is that nobody on this mountain ever needed me less than Daniel Tesse, and nobody ever gave me more. He didn't need a single thing I had. He pulled me out of the snow anyway. He didn't owe the Delgados anything. He went up that road anyway. He'd built himself a place where nothing could get in. 2 shells and a margin and a careful, quiet life. And the moment it mattered, he opened every door he had and let the cold and the strangers and the whole laughing county come pouring in. And he did it for one reason. The reason he gave me by the stove that he never gave anyone else. Seems wrong to keep all that warm for myself. I left my door cracked, the way I told him to. It's why I'm telling you this. It's why the log isn't just weather anymore. Some nights now there's a truck in the yard, the Delgados, a neighbor, somebody's kid wanting to hear about the storm, and the kettle's on, and the warm's not just mine. And I think about a curved steel roof shedding snow into the dark, and a man who built the most ridiculous, beautiful thing I ever saw, and what it cost him to let us all in out of the cold. There's a last postcard in the drawer I haven't told you about. It came 2 winters back, no return address, just the Phoenix postmark and his hand getting shaky like mine. It says, Cal, built one for myself again, smaller, you'd laugh. And then there's a line under it, and I've read it 100 times, and I still don't know if it's a question or a goodbye, or just a man finally leaving his door cracked too. I haven't written back yet, I keep meaning to. The kettle's on.